Now we'll go to New York for the Center for Economic Opportunity, and we'll hear from Linda Gibbs, the Deputy Mayor for Health and Human Services in the Office of the Mayor for the city, and Veronica White, the Executive Director of the New York City Center for Economic Opportunity in the Office of the Mayor there. Linda, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Great Deputy Mayor.
Thank you. CEO, our Center for Economic Opportunity, has proven itself to be innovative and collaborative leader in the fight against poverty, in enhancing efforts in New York City, in cities across the country, and at the federal level. Its origins lie in Mayor Bloomberg's 2006 Poverty Commission. This was co-chaired by Jeff Canada and Dick Parsons, which convened city officials, nonprofit leaders, others in the business sector, all together around the table to identify promising new anti-poverty strategies. And over the course of several months, the Commission succeeded in bringing a lot of new ideas and energy to the task of reducing urban poverty. But more importantly, for our talk today, it wasn't just about creating new ideas. Mayor Bloomberg wanted to create accountability and results in the execution of those ideas. And so he established the CEO, and he put this new office in the mayor's office. The center staff has since collaborated with agencies partners to launch more than 50 new programs and to measure their impact. In addition to that work, we took on the enormous task of becoming the first locality in the country to create an alternative to the flawed federal poverty measure. So back on our pilot implementation. The pilots focus anti-poverty initiatives around building assets, training workers, providing education and employment, and we particularly focus on high-risk youth. All the CEO programs are funded by a public-private innovation fund, a mix of private philanthropic dollars and public dollars, and they are all evaluated to measure their effectiveness. We then use the results of those evaluations to decide whether or not to continue the programs. We share the lessons that we learn through regular impact reports that we share among all of our participating agencies with internal and external evaluation teams, and we post them on our website for broad dissemination. So as much knowledge sharing as we can around these lessons. Our ability to have a big impact lies in the rigorous way it is that the CEO has structured this work. It acts first as an implementation team, and then as an accountability mechanism. It has the authority to create cross-agency initiatives, getting organizations out of their silos and together at the table, to mandate results in exchange for funding, and to terminate funds when the programs don't perform. The innovative programs, evaluation agenda, and poverty research efforts have been a catalyst in the fight against poverty, and CEO is now a key driving force behind several new city and federal initiatives, and Veronica is going to explain those to you.
Thank you, Linda. Over the past 5 years, CEO has brought new focus to New York City's anti-poverty work. We've launched promising programs to help more than 100,000 residents, convene stakeholders to share lessons learned, and use the Innovation Fund to direct resources towards programs that work, efforts that are particularly important given the current state of our economy. And since we last presented here, we've made great strides, using evidence to demonstrate our success, scaling up programs, and attracting new investment. One example of this success is our Cuny ASAP program. This program has doubled the number of students graduating from community colleges. Cuny ASAP is expanding services at all 6 of our New York City community colleges and has inspired the model for the city's newest community college, which will open next year. Other governments are learning from CEO's experience in adapting programs for their own cities. CEO has been able to support this work through our learning networks, including the Cities for Financial Empowerment. Co-chaired by our own Office of Financial Empowerment, the first office of its kind in the city, in the country, other cities are establishing their own offices and modeling some of their programs on our own asset development initiatives. The federal government has just expressed support in several ways also. In particular, just last week, the Census Bureau released a supplemental poverty measure, an alternative measure of poverty informed by CEO's experience developing a new measure for New York City. Rebecca Blank, the Deputy Secretary at the Department of Commerce, which oversees census, credited CEO for leading the way. Perhaps the most important development of the last year is our work to replicate programs in New York and in cities across the country. Inspired in part by CEO, the Obama administration created the Social Innovation Fund and selected intermediary organizations to expand promising and effective programs. New York was the only government to receive this award. We were funded to replicate 5 CEO programs in New York and 7 other cities, Cleveland, Kansas City, Tulsa, San Antonio, Youngstown, Memphis, and Newark, a quite diverse group of cities. We are providing on-site technical assistance to our colleagues in government, as well as to the nonprofit sector in those cities, as they embrace innovation and evaluation and develop new relationships with philanthropy. CEO's commitment to reduce poverty and to identify what truly works has attracted the attention of federal agencies, policymakers, and over 50 foundations. And our center continues to grow in significance. Of note is Mayor Bloomberg's recent innovation and decision to use CEO's research and development model in order to launch new programs and to evaluate those. And this new lab is going to be funded also by New York City taxpayers and private philanthropy. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions?
I'll go.
David?
Kathleen, did you?
Yeah, I love the community college. I had a couple of questions. One, which programs you think haven't worked and why? You know, an example. And two, it seems very programmatic, which is terrific. You know, what works. I was wondering if you ever think of also proposing policy or legislative changes, either at the state, at the city, state, or national level that you learned you think would be helpful to address poverty.
Well, I'll do the first and Linda the second, perhaps. So one of our
Okay.
programs that we borrowed from Mexico was a conditional cash transfer program. And we actually tried 3 different models in New York City, and one didn't work at all. It was a program giving small amounts of money to students in schools for success on certain exams. We terminated that program. One worked in large part for high school students and with respect to health and poverty reduction. And that program, what we did was we lost the parts of the program that didn't work, and we regrouped around what did work, which is for the students at the high school level, and we're now doing that program in New York City and in Memphis.
On the question of policy and legislative changes, I think, and it's a good question because it may get lost in the discussion of implementing these programs, that what the CEO actually does is convene leaders that are working on similar issues around a single table and allows them to think about the implementation of the programs, but then allows them really to talk about how those programs function in the environment they're working in. And there's a lot of cross-agency learning and innovation that goes on around the programs. And I think that's really a unique part of this structure, that the CEO has created sort of a place, a venue for that to happen. And so I think our financial empowerment work is a great example of that, where the Office of Consumer Affairs has launched a number of empowerment centers in communities, but the agencies, like our Human Resources Administration and our Department of Homeless Services, are embedding some of those practice changes into their mainstream programs. And so it's sort of spilling outside just the narrow program implementation. And so those are really true policy changes within the organizations. And on the legislative items come up all the time. So we're going up to Albany, down to Washington, in order to advance the agendas that come out of those discussions.
I really want to salute you for this program. I think it's extraordinary. And I think that the true test comes when you take what you've learned from the pilot programs that you're using $150 million a year to fund, and then use those learnings to change the billions of dollars that New York spends in its budget every year through its departments. Has that started to happen yet? And if so, can you give us some examples?
I think the financial empowerment is a clear example of that. Jonathan Mintz, our commissioner, is now, the way he describes it, he calls it the super vitamin. That the way to actually get mileage out of the lessons is to take the concept and then to impose it within the organizational spending that's already there. That you really don't need a lot. A lot of that, his spending, quite frankly, was to buy a new little community storefront and get a CBO into that storefront to bring the community empowerment work, the financial empowerment work. Now he's not going that way anymore. He's trying to embed it into all those existing offices that we have. Let's bring this practice as a mainstream part of their function. And then the other thing, I think another great, there's been, I feel like it's an explosion in the way that we think about job training, development, and placement. A lot of this work was around trying to find the tricks to reach very hard to reach populations with our employment training programs. So we took these special pots of money, created new programs, and figured out what worked for these very hard to engage young people. But those lessons now, and this is also key, because those initiatives were being managed not off to the side by somebody else, but by the agencies responsible for the mainstream employment development work. Those special learnings were embedded in the agency and have really filtered out into the practice of the agencies. Any other?
And that's particularly true with respect to our Workforce Investment Act dollars, which are basically many of them handled by our Small Business Services Department. We piloted 8 different programs with SBS, and many of our programs, whether it's our sector approach or advancement approaches at work, have now permeated all of the different programs that SBS is doing.
This is a different type of question, but the word CEO, I find, it doesn't sort of say war on poverty, or it doesn't say what it does. And have you thought of changing your name?
You know, it's interesting, when the mayor started this and gave us our direction, we have a city that spends billions of dollars on anti-poverty work.
Right.
And we were doing the same things and doing them effectively, but, our poverty rate had not changed. We weren't going down in the way that you would think we would. And so his direction to us was that, we need a big, strong safety net. Let's make sure it's working. But what I really want you guys to do is to bring the new ideas to the table, to take some risks, and to bring new approaches. And it was very much focused on helping to connect the very disconnected into economic opportunity. And so that's really where it came from.
One addition to that, for our participants in our programs, they really like the idea that it's about opportunity and not about poverty. And so we're recruiting people all the time into our programs, particularly our young people, our various community college programs. And when they hear economic opportunity, it just resonates better with them rather than speaking to someone and saying, well, this is our poverty program. So it just speaks in broader terms and goes back in a way to the OEO and the Office of Economic Opportunity and using that language. So it is tricky at times, but we find, in particular for our participants, they like the language better also.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, great program. Thank you so much for traveling
so
up here
much.
to talk to us.